you've educated me. I came to Jack already with these incredible ideas based on a book, and I wanted to create a whole pantheon of gods based on the book. And we discussed philosophy an awful lot. So your work is phenomenal. I only met you years later. I mean, that was part of the whole thing, but what philosophy did he pass to you about some of these, for example? Like that one, because you captured, without even being there, that's my question, you captured the energies that we had often discussed. How did you do that as an anchor without communicating?
Well, I have to say that probably, unconsciously, I was aware of, put it this way, Jack's spirituality, and we just never, well, if he talked about philosophy, it was the kind of thing in a conversation, I wouldn't think about it as talking about philosophy and beliefs and so on until like maybe a day later. It's like, oh, you know, maybe I'm just slow. I often wonder when I hear people who've talked with Jack at great length when he would do his war stories. And I say, gee, all we talked about was movies and how were the kids and, you know. Because Jack, number one, I think, was a family man. And despite his creative genius, I think his number one thing was to take care of his family. And because I had a family, and it was a case of, this was somebody inking his work who was not a name or somebody he'd met years ago at the office in DC. So maybe the fact that I was a family man and I was concerned in supporting my family, that we talked more about things that probably if I were to analyze it, maybe were philosophical, or there was some spirituality in it, but, oh good, now I know my name.
I just want to answer.
Please, so
great.
tell me to shut up.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
What?
You mentioned working with Jack at the earlier panel, and sometimes he would get angry.
Oh yeah.
And
I have the distinction. I have the distinction of being thrown out of the Kirby house 5 times. Well, not thrown out bodily. Jack didn't leave abruptly. While I was working on the art of Jack Kirby, I was a journalist, and there's a little background about my relationship with the Kirbys. I was hired by Glenn Kalita originally. Remember Glenn Kalita? Yes. Art guy, the sculpture guy. And Glenn Kalita had an investor who I knew, who I did work for his company, Anello Industries, at a Koch assembly. Yeah,
The Koch.
Yeah, Koch. And this guy actually specialized in making rivets for aircraft. Okay. Yeah. So Kurt and I talked, and he goes, "Hey, what do you know about comic books?" And I was a little bit of a collector. I mean, I wasn't like steeped in it or anything like that. But he asked me if I would come over, if I would consider talking to Jack Kirby about a book. And Glenn Kalita was sort of responsible for the project. Long story short, I'm writing a book. And one of the caveats to my contract was I have to investigate, because I know almost nothing about it. And all I had was Greg Theakston's book, that little pamphlet that he had, and a couple other things. Oh, and that memorable attempt by another person we won't name. They're rather large ones. But they were beautiful, but they were just like it was all about him. And so my job was to investigate and find out why Jack did things and why there were these abrupt turns in his career and things of that nature. One of the things that got me thrown out of the house was my insistence on talking to him about Stan Lee. And he was very pissed off about Stan Lee, and he had a lot of reasons for it.
Were you guys at the Stan Lee tribute?
I was not.
In Hollywood? Did you go? Okay.
That one.
I went, Avi Arad went over there to do a memorial thing. And he said the greatest character that Stan Lee ever created was Stan Lee.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed, right? And I think that the thing about Stan is that, you know, for good or ill, or how that worked out, these men came across purposes and further stayed that way. And I was witness to, and this is my learning curve, I was witness following Jack around with a tape recorder, asking Jack questions, and, you know, and then he would, you know, say, hey, what was it like working with, you know, Joe Simon? And he goes, well, back in the war, you know, and he would do that, you know, that's how I wound up with, I don't know, 40 hours of tape, you know, Jack go wandering around into the wilderness, and then but there were these moments of fixation where you would like fix on things. And I would have to try and engineer an opportunity where I could get him fixed. And it became a strategy game to capture him.
Because otherwise he'd go off on a tangent and...
He would talk about whatever he wanted to talk about. You know? And it was hard to get him back to the topic because A, he either didn't remember, or B, he didn't care.
Did you also find out that Jack would tell you something which may have been philosophy or about things in life, and then you say, in other words, and tell it to you again, but from a different angle?
Another angle. You know, and I have this tape where it's like
Oh,
almost
yeah.
2 hours long,
I love
and he
that
starts
about
off and he goes, well, you know, about this, you know, and then about halfway through this, and I'm like, you know, and you go, in other words, the Mongolians, and I'm like, you know, shit, what did I miss? I have to go back to the tape and go re-listen to it.
What was the time period that you were doing this interviewing?
Between 1989 was the first interview.
Okay,
And
because
then through 92.
my years with him were the late 60s,
So he didn't
and
change.
into the 80s.
And he was like that before.
So I never saw him blow up.
Oh, no, I got him to blow up. Oh, yeah, because I insisted on talking about Stan Lee. Now, the thing about the Stan Lee story is that you guys know this one, where Mark Evanier was on the Stan Lee side. Let's get these guys to meet. And he said, Ray, and I'm like, yes, sir. You know, I need you to convince Jack that we have to meet with Stan at the San Diego Convention in 1989. This is the last year at the Omni Hotel, right? 1989, I think. Was it summer out, or was it 90? Anyway, somebody else can correct me on that. Okay, so Glenn Clea had this 20-foot booth. He spent way too much money on all this sculpture and all this art, and we had Stan and Jack meet each other. First time. You know, the problem with Jack was that he did not like to meet. He didn't want to meet with Stan because he saw it as a capitulation. That was his problem.
I can understand that.
Yes, exactly. And that's that generation too. There's we're talking about PTSD. You know, there's this mentality of giving up before the enemy. And so, but you see, and it's better if there's a pantomime, a really tall guy and a real short guy, and they're, you know, Stan walks up to Jack and goes, hi, Jack. He goes, hi, Stan. And they stop and they shake hands, and then Jack turns around, drops his hand, turns around, and goes, why don't you sign this? You know, I wish I had a photo of Mark Evanier's face. Mark Evanier was standing back there, and he was like, and then Stan just turns around and goes, well, nice talking to you, Jack, and then he takes off. Evanier is like chasing after him, you know, and I'm like, I'm astonished. I'm going, these titans of comics, this is what they do? What the hell is this? A madhouse of emotion.
Well, it's everybody was amazed when Stan showed up at the funeral.
Yeah.
Because it started, and then
You know,
the
and-
back door opens, and here's
And
Stan.
it's just like you could have heard a pin drop in the back of the room. It was like, son of a bitch, there he is. Wow, you know. But you see, the thing about Jack is that you know, I didn't learn yet how to control that, you know, reaction.
So it was early in the relationship.
Yeah, in the early relationship, well, Jack, what about Stan? you know, what was your working relationship? I insisted. I was like, you know, like a bothersome journalist in front of a gotcha politician thing, you know. So why did you sleep with the girl? You know, it's like, and he just looked at me and goes, I've had enough. And he just turned around and walked away from me. And then Roz would come over and go, I think it's time for you to go. You know, and that was it. That was it. You know, interview done. 2 hours back to Orange, and I had to reflect about this. And then I'd get a phone call back, and it's just, okay, he's ready to meet with you again.
And how was the relationship when he came back? Was it just like?
Oh,
it
peaches
never
and
happened?
cream. Peaches and cream.
Okay.
Well, playing amateur psychologist, do you think that part of that anger may have been the fact that Jack slightly, consciously realized, I mean, some of this anger was at himself.
He
for
knew
not
he had to deal with this because it was his book. He knew he
No,
had
but I
to
mean,
do
it's
it.
the,
But he didn't.
the anger for Stan,
Yeah.
he never really did that when he was working with Stan, and for many years afterwards. And I think some of his, if he exploded, I've had enough of this, it's, inside is like, if I hadn't been concerned about supporting my family, I would have told the son of a bitch where to go.
Yeah, yeah.
And so some of that is
Trapped.
anger at yourself.
Yeah, yeah, okay, so, all right, you know, and then I get, I was talking to you about the Jack Schiff story.
Yep.
Right? And the Jack Schiff, I don't know how close you guys are to the Kirby story, but there's a story about Jack Schiff who basically trapped Jack Kirby into a contract. It's the notorious napkin contract in 1953 or something like that. For the Skymasters. Jack Schiff was the editor at DC, was working on several books, but notably Challengers of the Unknown. And there are 5 guys. Oh, you should read Challengers of the Unknown. You're wondering, where did Fantastic Four come from? And there's actually the Challenge of the Unknown 3, where they go through the Van Allen belt, they're exposed to gamma rays, and they come back as a brick-looking guy, a flame-throwing guy, an invisible guy, and a guy gets stretched. It's like, what? And I forget what the 5th guy did. I think he was, I don't know, whatever. And so you know, there's Jack, and because his mindset, and this is what I did for analysis, is his mindset was, I'm borrowing, but from myself. I came up with these stories. I'm writing it with, yeah, Schiff is over there editing, but I wrote these stories myself, so they found parts of the story wound its way up in this syndicated strip called Skymasters of Space Force, right? And so Schiff sees this and he goes, hey, wait a minute, guys, you owe me money because we did this together. And he takes Jack out to a really nice restaurant. You know, he basically badgers him until Jack finally decides to sign a contract on a napkin. You know, and I asked Jack about that. I interviewed Schiff, got some of the story from Schiff, went to Jack Kirby and asked him to fill in the blanks, and it was thrown out of the house again. He just got up and walked away. He didn't even say that's enough. You know, and there were other times, but you see, I was working as a journalist, and I had to get these answers. I mean, there's one thing about this is that the book was Jack's book, so I was asked not to peddle too hard on some of these things. And a lesson learned, you know, I learned how to work with celebrities and high energy people who have a lot of vested interest in their future and their past and everything. So it taught me a lot of things about working in that capacity or in that range. But it was really quite an experience. And by the way, I really like the way you described the peanut butter jelly sandwich and the coffee thing, because I saw it as entering the Kirby temple and being served communion by Roz. It was peanut butter jelly sandwich and Sega coffee.
You know, when I first walked there, he did show me Silver Surfer, a graphic novel, and he was grumpy about Stanley, yes, and but none of that mattered when we got engrossed. The real question.
Oh yeah, he would get so engrossed in conversation.
You know, and your example of recording conversations over many years, all of that was the same exact thing in 1978 when we would sit down, and then the next thing I know, these things would pop up.
Right.
And, you know, but it really was that he was like already there, and the rest of the world was, I'm getting sick and tired of this, but he was too much of a religious man to not feel bad for us, maybe. For, you know, like a little humble about it, well, they'll get there. But he believed in gods. He believed in the intelligences within the universe.
I'll tell you one time, I told Jack, you know, what you just told me just totally confused me. He goes, you should talk to a rabbi.
And then I showed up.
What? Okay.
You know, Jack never made a point of religion, but I knew he was very respectful of whatever beliefs you might have, or how, you know, however you interpreted things. Yeah. And I know this sounds silly, but the first Christmas I ever knew, he gave me a Christmas present. You know.
That's good. You know,
and he asked me, it's kind of,
he asked me, he goes, what's, you know, we were talking about religion, he goes, and so do you have a faith? And I'm going, I'm an atheist, or a Buddhist. He goes, oh, okay. You know, kind of like, we'll work with that. Never ever calling you on it. It's just like kind of going with the flow.
Well, maybe Jack didn't talk to me that much about his problems with Stan or the war stories, because I was a young family man and he believed in family, and so those other stories were not necessarily relevant to our life and relationship. And because you and I knew Jack in different decades.
Yeah.
Because the last time on a regular basis that I worked for Jack would have been, I started at Disney in May of '79. Now, sometime after that, he asked me if I had time to ink, I think it was Silver Star. And of course, we had lunch at the Copper Penny that doesn't exist anymore, across from the bungalows at Warner Brothers. And we sat there at lunch, and he told me the story, and I'm thinking, geez, that's a lot of stuff for one issue. Okay. Well, it was all 7 issues. They were done and written. And I will say this, I haven't told too many people about this, but there was, in the first or second issue of Silver Star, I added some narrative. And the reason I added it is because it was all there in his head. Roz knew it all, so when he put it down on paper, he left out something. I'm going, this doesn't make sense because it doesn't say. And so and I'm sure that no matter how closely or loosely he may have looked at it, he would have never noticed it, because instinctually I knew what, if he thought about it at the time, he would have done. But it's like Jack Kirby edited his own books, and Roz normally was edited Jack, but it was, since they both knew the story so well, that little narrative, they didn't miss it because they knew. It's like all the people who loved the movie Blade Runner and finally went to see the final cut without the voiceover narration. It's like they'd seen the movie. I've seen it 69 times. I mean, they've seen it dozens of times. But my son's wife, he took her to see the film without the narration, and she's going, what the hell was going on in that movie? Well, that's the kind of thing that everybody who knew the story knew the story. And so my contribution in one issue of Silver Star is a line of narrative.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining the panel. Sorry we didn't have time to ask questions.
Well, one more thing.
Search us out in the vendors.